A little while back, while I was putting together a recent video about Edinburgh's tram extension plans, a Scottish friend of mine told me I should take a look at Edinburgh's lost South Suburban Railway line. Now, that line isn't really lost, the tracks still very much exist, which is more than you can say for some of Edinburgh's other old railway lines, and they are even still in use, just by freight trains, with regular passenger service along the route having basically ceased in the 1960s. However, over the years there have been various calls to return passenger services to the line. These calls have grown even louder more recently, with the city building out its tram network, as people are taking more interest in how mass transit could work in the city, and as we start to see ways the old rail line could potentially become part of, or even just complement the trams. As such, in this video, we're going to look back at the history of the South Suburban line to see why it was built, but also why it was eventually closed to passengers. We'll also look at the various plans to bring these passenger services back, and how they could form quite an integral part of Edinburgh's growing public transport network. Now, I think many of you who watch this channel probably have a special appreciation for infrastructure, history, and how these things come together to shape our societies. So I wanted to tell you all about a pretty cool book I've recently gotten my hands on, and has become my go-to cozy read for the winter, called The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization by Hungry Minds. This is not your average book, it's a massive, beautifully illustrated encyclopedia that walks you through humanity's greatest inventions and discoveries, everything from early engineering, art, science, and of course even the railroad. There are over 180 topics in here, so every time I open it up I end up learning something unexpected, which as someone who loves to collect random bits of knowledge, I absolutely love. And clearly I'm not the only one. The book was famously a Kickstarter success story, raising over $2.3 million and becoming a 2023 bestseller. And when you read it, you can see why. It's filled with beautiful illustrations that blend medieval manuscript aesthetics with detailed engineering drawings, and printed beautifully with premium matte art paper, all enclosed in laminated hardcover. With the holidays coming up, I think you could make a really special gift for the curious people in your life, or honestly for yourself. It's a chance to give something meaningful and even inspiring. If you want to check it out, just follow the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, and you can use the promo code CityMoose10 to get a special holiday discount, courtesy of Hungry Minds. Back to the South Suburban Railway though, and to understand the position it is in today, it's worth looking at why it was constructed in the first place. In the mid-1800s, the main way to get trains from one side of Edinburgh to the other involved running them directly through the centre of town via Waverley Station. This route was becoming increasingly congested with both freight and passenger movements, and due to the existing railway's geography, situated in the bottom of a valley, adding additional tracks to increase this capacity would have been quite challenging and definitely very costly. On top of that, it was worried that railway congestion was only going to get worse due to the planned fourth railway bridge, which would send even more railway traffic into Edinburgh. As a result, people started looking for other ways to boost capacity, and one of these was to separate out much of the freight traffic by redirecting it through a bypass to the south of the city. In the 1870s, it was a company called the North British Railway, who were one of the biggest railway companies in Scotland at the time, who submitted plans for such a line, and in 1880 the Edinburgh Suburban and Southside Junction Railway Act received royal assent, thus kicking off its construction. The line would start near Haymarket with a triangle junction before heading south and crossing beneath the Union Canal. The line would then turn gradually eastward to pass through Morningside, then Blackford, Newington and Craigmillar, before reconnecting with the existing railways at Portobello. At the time of the line's construction, most of the land around its route was pretty rural, and as such freight traffic was definitely its primary purpose. However, the North British Railway did hope that, over time, passenger services could form part of the line's revenue as well, and thus, as part of the construction, passenger stations were included at Gorgie East, Craig Lockhart, Morningside Road, Blackford Hill, Newington and Duddingston and Craigmillar. It is worth noting that these station names varied a little bit over time, and not every station was there in time for the line's initial opening to passengers. That said, with the construction of the line complete, it would open to goods traffic in autumn of 1884, with passenger service starting just a few months later. Those early passenger operations mostly consisted of hourly services running in either a clockwise or counterclockwise loop from Waverley Station, but it didn't take long for demand to grow. The new stations spurred new development, and soon the land around them was no longer particularly rural. As a result, more passenger services would be added, and this line quickly grew to become an integral part of Edinburgh's transport network. For a while, things were looking pretty good for the line. It let freight services bypass the congested Waverley station, and was seeing a surprising amount of success as a passenger railway as well. However, while its usefulness as a freight bypass is still as relevant as ever, its passenger service heyday wouldn't last. As Edinburgh's suburbs expanded southwards, so did its historic tram network, and these trams were often able to outcompete the trains for a few reasons. Firstly, the fare costs were usually a bit lower than the trains. Secondly, they had way more stops, usually located along the main roads, which often made them easier to walk to. And thirdly, they provided a much more direct route into central Edinburgh, where, for example, a train from Newington would need to make a big loop to get to Waverley Station. A tram could just head there directly. This meant that trams, and then eventually buses, would end up stealing a large number of passengers away from the railway. This was further exacerbated in the 20th century as private cars started growing in popularity, further drawing people away from the line. This would all culminate in the 1960s, at which point passenger services on the line had become quite unprofitable. The fact that the line had been nationalised, and I would think as a result not expected to make a profit, would not save it. And in 1962, its passenger services would end, leaving it as basically just a freight railway, and with public transport in South Edinburgh becoming exclusively the domain of buses. At the time, however, while the line's passenger figures weren't what they were at its peak, it still did have quite a few people using it, most of whom were pretty unhappy about what had happened. A year after the line's closure, a survey published in the Times found that a pretty overwhelming 82% of people who had regularly used those passenger services considered their journeys to now be worse, with just 3% feeling they'd gotten better. So it's not terribly surprising that almost immediately after the passenger services ceased, there were calls to bring them back. In the 1970s, a group called the Coburn Association campaigned to reopen passenger services, going as far as chartering a passenger train on the line to demonstrate interest. In the 1980s, Edinburgh Council briefly investigated restoring passenger services, and in the 2000s, a developer-funded consortium called eRail started raising funds to bring back passenger services, with the idea being these developers could build new homes and offices around the stations. Also around then, a group called the Capital Rail Action Group campaigned for the line to reopen as part of what they called Crossrail 2, no relation to the modern London project of the same name. All of these attempts ultimately went nowhere, but that didn't stop the topic coming up again. The idea would be revisited by Edinburgh Council later that decade, but they concluded that there would not be enough capacity at Edinburgh Waverley to accommodate the additional services this line would bring, and the effort required to add such capacity would not be justified by the so-called limited benefits it would bring. Come 2014 though, and the first leg of Edinburgh's modern tram system opened, sparking renewed interest in how trams could form an even greater part of the city's transport network. Shortly after this opening, campaigners proposed bringing the South Suburban line back using tram-train hybrids that could run on both the railway and the street, meaning that they could run alongside the existing freight trains using the line, and then once they reached central Edinburgh, they could continue their journeys along the street so as not to add more services to the already crowded tracks leading into Waverley Station. This idea would even receive support from the then managing director of the ScotRail Alliance, who described it as a real practical solution, although again little progress was made. Fast forward to the 2020s and the South Suburban line still remains freight only, but the calls to change this have been growing louder. At this point, Edinburgh has become one of the most congested cities in the UK, with a report by Edinburgh Council finding that Edinburgh drivers are spending a higher proportion of their driving time in congestion than any other UK city. And this traffic has real consequences, with a separate report suggesting Edinburgh's congestion is costing the UK economy over £100 million a year. So it's not surprising that people are increasingly looking for ways to address this. Now, as I'm sure many of you watching this video already know, trying to address this with more road infrastructure would likely backfire, as it would result in induced demand, which would only make traffic worse. A much better way to address this issue would be through improved public transport, and Edinburgh has been making at least some progress on this front in recent years with the construction of the city's modern tram system. It even looks like Edinburgh Council is keen to keep expanding the system with new routes to the north and south to complement the existing east-west one. A topic I've covered more thoroughly in a separate video. I'll put a link to it on screen if you're interested in checking it out. If we plot Edinburgh's existing rail services on a map, then add the existing tram network and then these proposed north-south extensions, we can see the network becomes a very radial one, with all the lines basically leading from the city's centre out to the suburbs. I think this is fine as a starting point. Suburb to centre journeys tend to be the best performing public transport routes, so it makes sense to build them first. But if Edinburgh wants its network to mature, the public transport network is going to need to accommodate a more diverse range of journey types. And this is where the most recent campaign to bring the South Suburban Line back comes in. The campaign originated from a group of university students at Heriot-Watt University, but has quickly grown a lot bigger than a simple university project, and I think for good reason. Their proposal has strongly emphasized practicality and keeping costs low, which are all very important things in an age where the extraordinarily high costs of some public transport projects, looking at you HS2, have made some people grow quite skeptical of them. In it, they suggest reopening the line with stations at Gorgie, Craiglockhart, Morningside, Blackford Hill, Newington, Cameron Toll, Craigmillar, Bingham Nidri, Fort Kinnaird, Brunstane and Portobello. It's worth noting that Newington and Cameron Toll stations could offer interchanges with the planned southern extension of Edinburgh's tram network, while Brunstane could offer an interchange with the existing national rail services at that station. In my view, these interchanges are particularly important. One of the issues that doomed the original passenger services on the South Suburban Line were the very circuitous journeys they needed to take to reach central Edinburgh. But these interchanges will allow people to easily transfer to more direct services into the city centre. On top of that, the interchanges will also mean people don't necessarily need to pass through the city centre when journeying from one suburban destination to another, meaning a more flexible transport network that's able to cover way more journey types. Like some earlier proposals, this one suggests the use of tram-trains, meaning that on the western end, the trams will be able to join with Edinburgh's existing tram network near Murrayfield Stadium, where they could then potentially continue to other parts of the tram network such as central Edinburgh. Now, while putting together this video, one of the students behind this campaign, Corey Boyle, was nice enough to reach out to me about it. So instead of me just blabbing on about it like I tend to do, let's hear what Corey has to say about why this tram-train approach could be so practical.
The South Sub is a unique opportunity because much of the costly rail infrastructure already exists. With tram-trains and battery technology, we can turn this freight line into an orbital route that cuts car dependency, reconnects communities and provides the backbone for a future regional tram-train network across the city and into the Lothians. Edinburgh is already one of Europe's best small cities, and this can be the catalyst to give it a mass transit system worthy of that success and status.
In their proposal, they even suggested a potential second phase that could see the tram-train running along another currently freight-only railroad along the city's northeast coast to link up with the current tram network again in Leith. And we can see how, if this goes ahead, and especially if Edinburgh Council fills in the tram gap between Newhaven and Granton, an almost complete circle line around Edinburgh could start to form, which would undoubtedly be a major boost for public transport in the city. While Corey and his team's proposal may have started out as a simple university project, it has grown far beyond that. It made waves in the Scottish press, being featured in a number of major newspapers, it's seen councillors from Edinburgh City Council get involved with the campaign, and it has even been awarded funding from Transport Scotland to be developed further. To me, this suggests the calls to bring the South Suburban Line back are gaining momentum, and as Corey put it to me, at this point it's very probable it will eventually go ahead, it's just a matter of when. Personally, I'm very happy to see Edinburgh's increasing interest in moving away from car-based infrastructure and towards public transport, and I think quick win projects like this one could play a very important role in this. Mass transit projects are often very expensive and slow to build, but when you have opportunities to reuse existing infrastructure in this way, I think it would be a waste not to. The South Suburban Line once formed an integral part of Edinburgh's passenger transport network, and I think if this project can get off the ground, it will be able to once again. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Also, if you want to get involved with campaigning for the reopening of the South Suburban Line, the campaigners have set up an online petition, which I will link to in the description. But with all that said, I'm Kyle, aka CityMoose, and as always, thanks for watching.